Hi everyone, thanks for coming today. So my talk will be on the validation of a bedside ultrasound protocol to basically predict overall lean tissue mass. So I want to start off by talking about body composition. It changes dramatically over our lifespan. From infancy to adulthood, our muscle mass, our fat mass, and even our bone mass changes dramatically. And so it affects many different aspects of our lives, from our metabolism, nutrition, physical activity, and even during times of illness. And subsequently, our body composition plays an integral role in modulating many of those very same aspects of our lives. And one important aspect of our body composition is our lean tissue health. So starting around the 5th decade of life, we see this slow, gradual loss of lean tissue mass. So on our y-axis, we have our lean tissue mass, and on our x-axis, we have our age. And so you can see this slow, gradual loss of lean tissue mass, and at some point, you'll reach below a disability threshold in which you no longer have enough lean tissue mass or strength to perform your activities of daily living. And so you could be considered functionally disabled. And so we have a number of different modalities in which we can use to assess our lean tissue mass. Some more common ones being a DEXA scan, in which we use a kind of a different energy x-rays to assess these tissues. A CAT scan or an MRI, which we can take abdominal images, and they relate very well to whole body measures of lean tissue mass, as well as something as known as a bioelectrical impedance analysis, which basically uses an alternating current to assess these tissues. So using these modalities, we can not only begin to track changes over time of our lean tissue mass, but we can also use them to identify individuals who might be below that disability threshold. So each one of those modalities have specific cut points in which people below those have a poorer function, basically. And so this sort of nice gradual loss of lean tissue, it might actually not be the most accurate picture of how we age. There's emerging evidence that, say, a short-term disuse, say from a flu or end up hospitalized and you're off your feet for a few weeks, you might enter this term known as a catabolic crisis, in which you have a rapid and dramatic loss of lean tissue mass with a little bit of recovery once you become ambulatory again. But if you have repeated bouts of this short-term disuse, you can reach that disability threshold at a much sooner rate. And so it's very important that we have modalities that we can assess our lean tissue mass during these catabolic crises. And then we can use them to then determine the effectiveness of certain interventions to attenuate these sorts of losses. And so when we look at what are the key features of a body composition modality, there's 3 things we can think of: accuracy, reliability, and accessibility. So if you think of something that, like say MRI, for example, you can get very accurate, very reliable measures of your muscle mass or your lean tissue mass, but it's not that accessible, especially during those times of those catabolic crises. So then we take BIA, for example. It might be very, very accessible and reliable, but it's not that accurate depending on the population you're studying. And so when you think of, well, what would be the ideal modality? It's probably going to lie somewhere in the middle, in which it's not as accurate and reliable as, say, MRI, but it's much more accessible, especially during those crisis times. And so one modality that is emerging that might fit this criteria is ultrasound, but there's still a lot of questions around it. So when you think of ultrasound, what do you think of? You usually think of imaging babies, but it can do a whole lot more than that. One thing it can measure is the thickness of the muscle. So you can take different thicknesses at various anatomical sites. Here's an image of the quadriceps musculature, in which you can take the thickness from basically the bone to the top of that muscle. I have a laser pointer. I don't know why I'm not using it. From this bone right here all the way up to the top of that muscle. And you can use those to predict overall muscularity. And so if we look into the literature, the most comprehensive protocol we've come across so far is this 9-site protocol. And basically everywhere where there's one of those little white circles, you can take an image and you can take the thickness of the muscle from your pictures. And it's very, very accurate in predicting overall muscularity. But how feasible is this in certain clinical populations or during those times of catabolic crisis? It needs to be done in a standing position, and it's fairly time-consuming. So there's been more expedient protocols developed. This one specifically focuses on the quadriceps at 2 points, the midway and the lower third. And so this has been applied in many different clinical populations, and so it's very feasible. However, it's never been tested against a whole body measure of lean tissue mass, so we have no idea of how accurate that protocol is. So this brings me to the objectives of my thesis, is we're going to, in healthy older adults, we're going to see how well these quadriceps muscle thicknesses relate to measures of lean tissue mass from the DEXA scan. And we hypothesize we'll obtain a fairly strong correlation. And then subsequently, we're going to take easily obtained covariates such as age, sex, and BMI and see if we can improve our predictive accuracy in addition to our quadriceps measures. So basically, this is kind of the cheating slide that shows my whole presentation. Basically, we're taking older adults over the age of 60. We're going to have them undergo a whole body DEXA scan in which we can obtain their lean tissue. And then we're going to compare that and see how that relates to a quadriceps measure of thickness. And so far, we've recruited 30 healthy older adults with an average age of 73. It is weighted more towards the female population, but we're still actively recruiting, and so we're starting to recruit more males. We have a fairly standard BMI for an older adult with a pretty good distribution of those BMIs. And so when we look at the lean tissue mass, so I'll kind of skip the ultrasound measures because they're not really that intuitive, but I'll hop onto the lean tissue mass from our DEXAs. So we have a pretty average lean tissue mass, as well as one important aspect of our DEXA scan is there's cut points, again, that can identify people below that disability threshold. So if you take the lean tissue in the arms and the legs and you normalize it to their height, you can identify people who are below that threshold. And so with our population, we have so far identified 1 male and 5 females who are below that threshold. So that'll come up a little later. And when we look at the correlation we've obtained, so basically we have our DEXA lean tissue on our y-axis and our quad thickness on the x-axis here. And we obtained a fairly strong correlation of R squared of 0.75. But if we look at here, the open circles are the females and the closed circles are the males, we do see still quite a amount of variability around this line, especially with the males. And so using those easily obtained covariates, we tried to improve this accuracy. And so when we accounted for both sex and weight, we dramatically improved that relationship to an R squared of 0.96. So perhaps sex and weight are 2 very important covariates that we need to always consider when we're assessing the lean tissue mass using ultrasound. Now, that is the one aspect, right? Just kind of like the assessing their lean tissue mass. But the other important aspect is identifying those patients or individuals who might be below that disability threshold. And so we performed an ROC analysis. And now this was only performed in our older women as we didn't have enough male participants to actually conduct the analysis. But we always need to keep in mind there was still only 19 females so far that we've recruited, and only 5 of them were below that threshold. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we kind of go over this analysis. So basically, we obtained our ROC analysis, and what you really want to see is this kind of go up to this far corner here and then across. So we saw this line, and the area under the curve ended up being 0.84. So that basically means that 84% of the time, you can correctly identify whether someone's low muscle or normal muscle. And this was only using our quadriceps thickness. So it's pretty exciting results, and as we recruit more individuals, hopefully it improves even more. So we did obtain that strong correlation between our quad thickness and our DEXA measures, but there was quite a bit of variability. So perhaps quad thickness alone isn't sufficient to actually accurately predict whole body lean tissue mass, and we need to account for some other covariates, specifically sex, weight. And quad thickness was moderate overall, and 0.84 is a moderate at correctly identifying lower than normal lean tissue mass. But we always need to keep in the back of our mind that our sample size is skewed towards females and it is quite small. And now moving forward, it's important to first assess what are the ideal landmarks. Perhaps quad thickness alone isn't enough to accurately predict lean tissue mass, so perhaps we need an upper limb measure, such as the biceps, and we get a more comprehensive image. As well as we need to assess the reliability of the entire protocol, because ultrasound is a user-dependent modality. You have a lot of impact on the actual results. And ultimately, we're assessing lean tissue mass, but perhaps that's not the most important aspect. It's actually function. If someone can still function normally, it doesn't really matter what their lean tissue mass is, so it's an important aspect we need to consider how these results relate to function. And then finally, how well do these ultrasound measures track changes over time? And I just showed kind of a sliver of my master's thesis so far, and so we're actually conducting these first 2 as well alongside them. Thank you. Oh, and of course, thanks to everyone in our lab, and quite a few of them are here, so thanks for coming.